Awesome. Good. Well, I'm so glad you're here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started in order to maximize our time. And before we get into the meat of our conversation, I want to give you our agenda for our half an hour together, as well as background on me and Live in a Big World. So here we go. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a conversation about keeping SEL close during distance learning. I'm going to share some tips with you that I've gathered as I have been reflecting on this, and also as I've been having conversations with educators across the country over these last few weeks, and also doing some deep dive work as a consultant with a local school in Nashville, Tennessee. Just to give you a bit of background, well, and the other part of what we'll do is have you ask questions and add comments in the chat. So please make sure that you can see that. There's the chat bubble at the bottom of the screen. Click on that. You will see the chat appear on the right-hand side of your screen. And then if you want to comment, make sure that at the very bottom of the chat, you select all panelists and attendees so everybody can see you. Joseph, if you can just add your question to the chat, that would be awesome, so that I can see you and we can go ahead and get started. All right, so a little bit about me and Live in a Big World. So I started Live in a Big World back in 1996, before SEL was what it is today. Hi, Joseph, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. At that time, we were focused on youth development, positive youth development, and character development. So that's when I began this work. Founded Live in a Big World as a nonprofit organization at that time. Since then, have been providing programs and services to kids, families, schools, and communities in the Nashville area and around the world, specifically in urban, rural, suburban, everywhere really, and then in South Africa and some other areas in Africa through our curriculum, professional development training, our school assembly programs, and other classroom resources. During quarantine, as many of us in both education and business and nonprofit, we've pivoted in order to provide our services to kids, families, schools, and communities in this new world in which we're living. So a few weeks ago, I was reflecting on this big debate that's happening in education. Are we going back to school in person? Is it going to be distance learning again? What's going to happen? And I'm sure all of you have your own story about the struggles in your schools and in your districts about getting acclimated to this new order that we find ourselves in. And how do we do SEL? Because if you've been keeping up with all the articles, the journals that are coming out, everyone is talking about how social emotional learning is preeminent at this time because of the trauma of the pandemic. And if you're in the Nashville area, we've had the trauma of the tornado, the pandemic, then the economic disruption that all of us have experienced globally. Then also here in Nashville, we had a second storm that came through in May. So our kids and families have just been dealing with one traumatic experience after the other. Therefore, social and emotional learning is more important than ever before. So how do we define social and emotional learning? The working definition that we use with Live in a Big World is helping kids identify what is going on in their heads and in their hearts so they can use their hands to build up and not tear down. I'll say that again. Social and emotional learning is helping kids identify what is going on in their heads and in their hearts so they can use their hands to build up and not tear down. And yes, that's based on Bloom's taxonomy. And yes, it is a very basic definition, but it encompasses so much because the work that we do, all of us do every day with social and emotional learning is simple, but it's not always easy. And we have to remember that it's about relationships. Relationships are the key. A little bit more about me and my background. So not only did I start Live in a Big World in '96, but back in 2010, after going through some traumatic experiences of my own, I found myself back in grad school at Vanderbilt here in Nashville, Tennessee, graduated from that program with my master's in education. After some time in the entrepreneurial community here in town, I ended up back on staff at the Center for Safe and Supportive Schools at Vanderbilt with Dr. Maury Nation, who is one of the preeminent youth prevention specialists in our country. And one of the things, it was such an honor to work alongside Dr. Nation, and one of the things that he told us as a team regularly was that it's not programs that change people, it's people. At the core of everything that we do that works in education is the relationship. And so I can't stress that enough. So as we're having this conversation about keeping SEL close during distance learning, I want us to focus on what can we do as educators, as caring adults in children's lives, as community leaders who are interacting with families to build relationship. And here are some tips. Firstly, intentionality. So whether we're in the classroom in person or whether we're meeting via Zoom or some other platform, we must be intentional in our schedule with the time that we carve out to help kids identify what's going on in their heads and in their hearts, and then help give them language for that, right? So an example of that might be, is I've been consulting with a school here locally. They've determined that they are going to kick off their SEL character development initiatives on Fridays with 15 to 20 minute lessons. And then that Friday, they will provide family activities that the families can do at home, which I think is an awesome idea. And then come back on Monday and they'll have conversations around the lesson that they introduced on Friday. And then Tuesday will be journaling, and Wednesday and Thursday will be other interdisciplinary activities. In addition to that intentional instruction, explicit instruction every day, they will also be having another conversation via social media, which the children and their families can participate in. So they have encompassed the entire school community, but they're being very intentional about the blocks of time that they've carved out, as well as the methods. So there's going to be direct face-to-face instruction via screen, but it's still face-to-face. And then there'll also be additional activities that happen via social, since we can't be together in person. So that intentionality is key. Secondly is content. Selecting content. Now, especially, not only are we dealing with the pandemic, but we are dealing with this racial conversation that has needed to happen for decades, right? So we as educators must be extremely aware of the representation in our curriculum so that all children see themselves in the stories and in the lessons that we're teaching. How do we do that? Well, there's incredible children's literature available that we can use for that purpose. There's also other content. I am a big proponent of incorporating pop culture into the conversations with kids around SEL and character development. What songs are they listening to that we can use and examine the lyrics and talk through what is the message behind this song? Is there a clip from YouTube, or a scene from a movie, or a scene from a television show that they're watching that we can use to spark the conversations that we want to have? Nothing unlocks somebody's heart like a story. It's a powerful tool. And once we can unlock a child's heart, as you know, then we can connect. And if we can connect with them in that way, then we can encourage the motivation to keep them engaged online, not just for the SEL component, but for the other academic areas as well. So intentionality and content. Thirdly, the focus on relationships. For many years, so I've been an educator since 1996. It's a long time. And I have seen the pendulum swing from the focus on holistic education to standardized testing. And now we're trying to find this middle ground again to how do we incorporate both the content standards as well as the evaluation and just the needs of the whole child, right? One of the things that I'm excited about in the current day of education is that we're focused on connecting and building relationships with kids. How do we do that? First of all, we need to make space for them to share what's going on in their heads and in their hearts, right? So we need to make sure that we are letting them know that what they're thinking, what they're feeling, their ideas, their opinions are valuable, and that we want to hear what they have to say. For far too long, it has just been us as talking heads at them and then expecting them to somehow ingest what we say and come out different. It doesn't work that way. What works is conversation. And that means, as I found, even with kids in classrooms where I've taught, and my own children at home, my kids are now 22, 17, and 14. It's the conversation that we have that not only changes them, but changes me. I have things to learn. My kids are teaching me all the time. So intentionality, content, relationships. Fourthly, real life experiences. So I know it's a struggle, this whole let me meet you on Zoom, who's gonna check in. There's all this conversation about making devices and Wi-Fi available so that we have equity in our instruction. Here's another part of it. When we're looking at instruction via screen, for all its intents and purposes, we're doing homeschooling. I'm just gonna say it. And according to School Board Association standards, the hours required are very different than if you're in the building. So for elementary, it's like 1 to 2 hours of instruction on screen per day. Middle school, 2 to 3. High school, 3 to 4. That doesn't, so can you see the school looks different? It doesn't mean just check in at 7:45 and you'll check out at 2:45 and you'll have a few bathroom breaks and food breaks in between. That's not how it works. So how can we create meaningful learning experiences, even with SEL, in the context of screens? Well, one of the ways is to have those on-screen experiences, like we're talking about, whether it's a morning meeting or an afternoon meeting. If you're with high school, you know, these high schoolers, they're sleeping in till like 12, 1 o'clock. I've got a 22-year-old, a 17-year-old, and 14-year-old. It's just the way they are. Their bodies need more sleep. They're going through synaptogenesis again, so they need the rest. That being said, we need to think about what their schedules are and what's working for them and those connection times, right? So we have those connection times that are on screen, but we also need to provide opportunities for them to experience the learning tangibly at home. How do we do that? Could be journaling, could be art projects, it could be some project-based learning, it could be STEM projects. There's all sorts of things, and yes, you can connect the dots back to SEL. Why? Because it's integrating. SEL is all about real life, right? So providing life skills, and yes, I'll go over this again, Mary Beth, in just a sec. So we want to provide opportunities for the kids on screen with us, giving that direct instruction and cultivating the heart conversations. How's their heart today? But then we also want to provide tangible opportunities for them to practice those skills. And then we can connect back and say, okay, when you took the time to journal, you're practicing self-awareness. Self-awareness is knowing what's going on with you and being aware of your strengths and weaknesses and working on those strengths and also working on those weaknesses. All right, so let me recap again because I'm getting some questions via chat. 1 is intentionality, 2 is content, yes, 3 relationships, and 4 those real life experiences, because we can't just expect kids to tune in on screen for long periods of time. It's not going to work. So if we want this to work, we need to create this experience in a way that they can connect. Yes, and Jennifer just asked me a question again. The sample SEL lessons, and also just to let you know, friends, I'm going to compile an email and send this out so that you'll have all these resources as well. So if you're busy taking notes, rest assured, I'm going to help you out and provide links to this recording as well as some other resources for you. So I'll recap that lesson in just a minute, Jennifer. So again, to go back, intentionality, content, relationships, real life experiences, and the fifth is family involvement. So what do I mean by family involvement? I have a lot of strong feelings about this, friends, and I'll tell you why. I'm a single mom. I've been a single mom for 12 years. When I became a single mom, I noticed that the perception of educators at my children's building was different of me than when I was married. It wasn't good. I didn't appreciate it either. They didn't know my story. They didn't know why I ended up being a single mom, and neither did they realize who I was and what I was doing in the world. So we need to, I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to be real. We as educators need to be really careful that we are connecting with families and bringing them in to the learning experience, not ostracizing them because we have a preconceived notion of who they are and what they do in this world. Parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, the family is the first place where learning occurs. And all of us together, school folk and family, together are on one team, and that is Team Kid. So we need to do everything we can to bolster that family and give them the resources and tools they need to support them more than ever, especially during this pandemic. And I know incredible work is being done. I know that because I've seen it in my community and I watch the news stories. I know that you all are at the front line supporting families, providing lunches and breakfasts and school supplies and all that. But I'm just advocating once again that as we move into the instructional phase, that we respect and value the contribution of our parents. They may not have the same education level as we do. That's okay. They still have incredible things to teach their kids about life in this world, especially at this time. So how do we do that? We can involve families in a few ways. One is just making sure that communication is clear. So using newsletters, text messages, Facebook, all the social media channels, they're tuned in there. Believe it, they are. There might be another communication system that your school has adopted, but using those basic social media channels, they're there, they're watching. Second is not just pushing information at them, but asking for their contribution as well. For example, the school I mentioned here in town, so they are advocating for family nights over the weekends after they introduce the lesson. And I will go through that schedule again in just a second. But they're also encouraging families, take a picture of that activity. If you're building a puzzle, take a picture building the puzzle. If you're playing a game or building a living room obstacle course, take a picture of that, share it on social media. Another is let the kids and families record videos of the work that's being done at home and share that. If there's art projects, take pictures, share the art projects. So there's challenges that we've all seen those social media challenges, but there's social media challenges that can be done by school or by classroom in order to engage, because we can't be together in person right now, but we can be together online, which is a beautiful thing. It just means we have to adapt our thinking a bit and realize that learning and conversation can happen virtually just like it does in school. So I'm going to recap again. Two things I'm going to recap, and then I'd love for you to ask some questions. So we want to be intentional. We want to focus on diverse content. We want to build relationships, encourage meaningful real life experiences. And I highlighted the word meaningful because I'm not just talking about like a connect the dot sheet. I'm talking about a meaningful real life experience that then you can say, oh yeah, when you were building this puzzle with your family, you were problem solving, you were communicating, you were cooperating, you were working as a team. Awesome for you. The fifth would be that family involvement piece. So whether it's providing storybooks or games or art supplies that can be used at home, giving very clear directives on how things can be done on social media. There's just all kinds of ways that we can involve the family, because the family is our children's first teachers, right? So we want to support them because we're all on the same team. So the schedule again, and please, I see one question coming in. You can share your question on the chat or in the Q&A. The schedule. I'll give you two different examples, okay, Jennifer? First was the school here. They wanted to introduce the lesson on Friday morning with their kiddos, and that's going to be like 15 to 20 minutes of a lesson. They're actually using Love in a Big World, so they're using our Speak Series video first. They roll into the lesson, so they're reading the story on Fridays. Then they're providing the family newsletters and family activities related to that character trait, and a challenge for the families to do over the weekend with directions for how they can correspond their activity with their social media involvement. So that happens over the weekend. Monday, they come back, they recap the story, they have a conversation about the story and the character trait and how it connects to real life. On Tuesday, they're journaling. And that's one of the things that, you can use a blank notebook, but we also provide Love in a Big World journals with prompts and all kinds of fun stuff. They're really cool. Wednesday and Thursday, they're doing some interdisciplinary activities. So it might be art projects or composition, drama, research, whatever else. And then on Friday, they're going back and doing the new lesson. So they've got it mapped out that way. Another way that I often encourage people to map it out is look at Monday through Friday schedule. So, story Monday, Tuesday conversation, Wednesday journal, Thursday, Friday would be your interdisciplinary activities. And then you're having the conversation on social media and connecting with families that way as well through the newsletters and activities. So let me take some questions. Some students didn't have access to computers or smartphones, and that was the problem. Yes. Refusing one. Yes. Okay. So I know that the access and equity was a huge issue. That's why CARES Act funding has been allocated to districts, and many districts are choosing to buy computers and Wi-Fi access. It's a challenge, and it's not going to go away. And I don't think we'll have it all figured out. Here in Metro Nashville, going back to school August 4th. I know they've got the computers and Wi-Fi ordered. I don't know if it'll all be delivered by then. So these are challenges that we have to face in our virtual world. So what do you do in that instance if everybody's not wired? Pick up the phone and make a call. I have a friend who's a principal here in town, and he spent a large portion of the first chunk of the pandemic just phone calling kids and families, and they were so excited to talk to their principal on the phone. Letter writing is another way to connect with kids. So if they're not wired, then find old school ways to connect with them. I've even seen other friends of mine, Dr. Kovac in Murray County, she was making home visits. So there's a lot of out of the box ways, and you have to feel comfortable given that we're still in a pandemic, but there's a lot of out of the box ways to connect. You could drive up to your kids' doors and meet with them in the driveway for a few minutes and just drop off some materials. So be creative. Yes, Janet, I will share that schedule in the email. Yes, I will share that. High school level. Great question, Michelle. So we are working with high schoolers, and I was just, I have a call with one of our high schools in just a little bit. And then I was talking with somebody out in California earlier this morning about her high schoolers for Boys and Girls Club. And here's what I suggest. Two things. One, with high school, using poetry as the jumping off point for conversation is an awesome way to get them going. And then getting them to write and create their own poetry, which is like song lyrics or rap. They love it. And the other tip I'll give for high school is flip it and let them lead the instruction. So if you're meeting with your high schoolers, hand the reins over to them. And this is where I think we as educators need to trust our kids more than ever before and empower them to lead and watch amazing things happen. And then also consider pairing those high schoolers with younger students in your district. So one of the ways that they can learn about SEL and character development is just by teaching it themselves. I mean, be honest, how much have you learned by being a teacher? Things that you never thought you learned, right? So using that opportunity for service learning is a great way to engage high schoolers. Okay, so I'm going to go to these questions in our Q&A. The sample schedule, yes. I will provide that again. I've talked about that a couple times. Hi, Jane. How long should the direct contact be made daily to effectively do SEL? Good question, Jane. This is something, I'm going to provide a link to this as well in the newsletter email that I'll send as follow-up. According to Dr. Maurice Elias at Rutgers University, we want about 75 minutes of SEL intervention per week. So if you break that down over the 5 days, it's about 15 to 20 minutes a day. It's manageable. It really is manageable. But we want to make sure that that time is meaningful. And again, it's not just us talking at them, but it's us engaging them. Next question, kindergarten level, how do you replace centers? That's an incredible question. There are some experiences that we're not going to be able to replicate at home like we would in school. What I would encourage, though, is how can you replace those activities or adapt those activities with supplies that would be easily found at home? Think Montessori. How can you use rice? How can you use pots and pans, wooden spoons, plasticware? How can you use those kinds of materials that would readily be available at home? The other is, and this was part of what I was talking about with another educator yesterday, is their school is actually purchasing the materials, and then they will be either delivering those materials to each home, or they will have a pickup drop-off time scheduled so families can come and they'll get their box of stuff. They'll get their crayons and markers and paper and textbooks and everything that they need along with their computers, so that it's a both and. That's really what I'm advocating for. And then we have to connect the dots again. So we say, okay, when you're struggling with this math problem, you're persevering. Perseverance is sticking to it, not giving up. And because we've already talked about perseverance as part of our SEL, then when we refer to perseverance in math, they're going, oh yeah, okay. Or when it's science project and they're working with a younger brother or sister. I mean, also think cross age level, right? Because you've got more resources at home, then you can say, when you're doing this science project with your little brother or sister, or when you're doing this science project with your mom and dad, you're working as a team to figure out this problem. Cooperation is working together with others as a team. So any way that you can connect the dots and integrate the language of SEL into those activities that they're doing helps enormously. All right, another question. Where can we find great diverse reading materials useful in SEL? Thank you for asking that question. My best suggestion would be, that's part of what we do with Love in a Big World. We've curated lists of reading materials, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and also for high school, that can be really incredibly useful for you. So if you're interested in those reading lists and materials, I post them regularly on our Music City Kids page. It'll talk about in our last minute here together. But yes, I will include some ideas about that as well in the newsletter. Yes, the recording will be sent, hopefully this afternoon, if not this evening. And lastly, I want to share another resource with you that could be helpful. Because I know, as Maria is saying, there's so many times, I've heard this from a lot of educators, that kids refuse to do the work. What can we do when there's no way to provide them with those devices? It's a tough situation for everybody. I don't have all the answers. That's why we need each other. So I encourage you to share the conversation. Let's just continue this conversation on the Love in a Big World Facebook page. If you've got ideas for Maria about this, please chime in. I would say we've got to provide the materials and supplies for kids at home. It's going to cost, but it's a cost that's worth it. The second thing is to remember that this is a trauma that all of us globally are experiencing at one time. I don't ever recall experiencing this in my lifetime. I don't know that, at least not my generation. I think the last global crisis like this that I can recall is like World War II, that impacted everybody, or almost everybody. So we need to give grace and space. I just want to remind us all of that, grace and space with one another, because tensions are high, stress level, anxiety, even with our kiddos. And what they need from us is to know that we are in this together with them and that we will come through. We have to remember, as I say all the time to the kiddos through Music City Kids, which is an online educational show that we started during quarantine for ages 6 to 12, and I'll include that resource as well in the newsletter, that love conquers fear. So fear is that source of anxiety and stress, but love conquers fear. So we need to remind the kids that we see them, we know them, we value them, we love them. And even if we can't be with them face to face, we see them, we know them, we value them, we love them, and we're in their corner. The families need to know that as well. So thank you so much, friends. I will send a follow-up email. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. Please feel free, if you've got more questions, email me, tamara@loveinaBigWorld.org. Connect on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And please continue dialoguing about this, because I think more than ever, we need each other. Know that we're here for you with Love in a Big World, and we're so thankful for the work that you're doing with our kids, families, schools, and communities on the front lines. You are the heroes of the day. Thank you so much. Know that you are loved, and I'll talk to you again soon. Oh, 2 more things. Next week, our webinar, we're doing 3 in a short period of time. Next week is going to be a webinar with Dr. Jennifer Hutton. It's about supremacy history, racial trauma, and present allies. That's on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And then next Thursday will be that practical logistics about SEL implementation with the practitioner I mentioned from the local Nashville school. So I will send out information about that as well. Please be sure to join us and tune in. In the meantime, know that you are loved. I'm championing you, and thank you so much for all you do to serve our kids, families, schools, and communities. Make it a great day.